Hello everybody, I really hope this works. This is the first time I've actually done this live through Zoom, so hopefully all the technical problems are sorted out now. Tonight I'm going to talk about the manufacturing of Neolithic stone axes around Penmaenmawr and Llanfyddechan. I'm sure that most of the members of the Penmaenmawr Historical Society know all about what a stone axe is. But I thought I'd just start by actually going through looking at Neolithic stone axes to show you what we're actually talking about. But actually I'll start with something that we're not going to be talking about. This is a Paleolithic hand axe, which would have been held in the hand and would have been used more as a cutting tool than what we think of as an axe. This is a wonderful thing from Boxgrove in Sussex that's actually 500,000 years old. So it's quite exciting in itself. But actually, we're not going to be talking about hand axes. We're going to be talking about axes that are much more like the kind of thing that we're used to. So we're going to be looking at the Neolithic period, which runs from about 4000 BC to 2500 BC. And this is the time when farming is first introduced into Britain. So this is a time of really big change. Obviously, this is before metalworking is invented or discovered. So all sort of hard cutting tools need to be made of stone, which is where the stone axes come in. When archaeologists talk about stone axes, actually what they mean are axe heads. Because usually that is what you find. Those are the bits that are made of stone, and usually that's all you find surviving on archaeological sites. But we know actually that these axe heads were hafted and used in a similar way to we use metal axes, and we know that because very occasionally conditions are just right, and you're really lucky to actually find the hafts still actually on with the axe heads, and here's a couple of examples found in Scotland and in the Lake District. And here's an example of early experimental archaeology. Here we have two gentlemen actually in Denmark cutting down a tree with replica Neolithic axes, which shows that you can actually use these perfectly efficiently to fell trees and use them like we would use a normal felling axe. And this was really important in the Neolithic. As I say, this is when farming first starts. By the Neolithic, most of Britain would have been covered with forests and woodland. So if people wanted to start farming, they actually have to start clearing the fields from scratch to open area to farm in. So axes would have been critical for this job. Also at the start of the Neolithic, people built these large buildings, houses or halls, which were timber framed. And also towards the end of the Neolithic, you have often ceremonial sites with timber circles or massive timber palisades. So there are lots of reasons to fell trees and need for woodworking in the Neolithic. So stone axes would have been really useful tools, critical to all sorts of aspects of the Neolithic life. But archaeologists also think that stone axes might have had other aspects, that perhaps they were culturally important as well as practically useful. Often when archaeologists find stone axes on excavations, they're found buried within ceremonial monuments, often damaged, broken before they're buried. This is an example from Llanfyddechan near Bangor, where before the industrial estate was built, there was some excavation done, and there were two Neolithic henges found. Now these are big circular monuments. This one has a ditch inside, and it would have had a bank outside. So these are really typical late Neolithic monuments. And inside the henge, there's a small pit And in the pit, there was one axe that had been broken in half before it was buried, and the remains of another axe, which has actually been broken into pieces, flakes napped off it, and these were buried in a pit. Now this looks like really sort of ritual activity. This is part of a ritual or ceremony, and using axes in this way rather suggests that they had some kind of symbolic and cultural importance. Also, axes were often quite beautiful things, and some clearly were made not just for practical purposes. These are examples of the real Rolls Royce of axes. These are axes made of jadeite, which is a very particular stone that came all the way from the Alps. And probably these axe heads were made in northern France, and then brought into Britain probably after several centuries. So these were actually brought in as heirlooms. And these are beautifully polished and beautifully shaped. They look wonderful things. They're often very thin, and certainly the type of stone is basically too brittle to be of practical use. You certainly couldn't fell a tree with this. So these are made for particularly sort of symbolic and cultural purposes rather than practical purposes. But even practical stone axe heads, a lot of those would actually have been very beautiful objects as well. Often when you find a stone axe head, it's been in the ground for millennia, and the surface has sort of degraded and changed, so you can't see how lovely they actually looked when they were new. Before the Neolithic, people did actually use stone axes, but often they were napped fairly roughly to shape. Sometimes they did actually sort of ground the edge of the axe, but in the Neolithic you get most axes are actually ground to shape overall the whole of the axe, and some of them are really finely polished. Grinding the edge, the blade of the axe, was a useful way of sharpening it, but grinding the whole lot really wasn't necessary for practical purposes, and certainly polishing had no real practical purpose. But what it did do was really show the quality of the stone, and you could really sort of appreciate the beauty of the stone. As I say, often we can't really do that with axes that we find, but this is an example which is actually newly made, and this is made using all Neolithic techniques from stone from above Penmaenmawr, which would have been used to make axes. So this is a genuine Neolithic axe, but just a very new one. And you can see how lovely these would have looked when they were new. I think this looks like a starry sky at night. And to me, this is really an object of desire, so much so that I actually paid a substantial amount of money to get this made. And I think that Neolithic people would have seen these in a similar way, that these were beautiful objects, perhaps even status symbols. They were practically useful, but these were something that people would really have wanted to own. And a lot of stone axe heads were made from flint. You can see on this geological map the yellow here all the way down the east and the south of England. This is chalk, and flint is found in chalk. The Neolithic people mined the chalk to get at the best large pieces of flint to make axes with. But across the rest of Britain, there's very little chalk and very little flint, certainly no good quality flint. But there are other stones that could be used to make axes. And in fact, some of these you could actually nap like flint, but were much tougher than flint. So we're actually really quite good for making axes. And stone axes have been found all the way across Britain. For hundreds of years, people have recognized that these were man-made objects. And much more recently, archaeologists have been wondering, where did these come from? Where was the source of the stone? And in the 1950s, archaeologists started actually analysing the axes that were found, that they took thin sections out of them and studied them under the microscope. So you could actually see the different minerals that made up the stone. And from this, they grouped them into different groups of similar minerals, and then actually looked to try and find the origins. Where were the sources of these particular stones? And they found various sources scattered over Britain, especially on the western side of Britain, where you've got volcanic rocks. And this map actually shows sources of both stone axes and stone battle axes, which are a later Neolithic, early Bronze Age find. So quite a lot of these sites are actually where the battle axes came from. But some along the west are stone axes, including one source in Northern Ireland. And down in Cornwall, there's quite an important source of stone that axe heads were made from. And you find these distributed across Cornwall and Devon and sort of the southwest. But up in the Lake District, there was a very important source of stone for stone axes. And the stone axes from there were distributed all the way across a large part of Britain, with a few of them getting across to Ireland as well. And this is the group known as Group 6 axes. And when we're looking at this kind of distribution, we don't want to be thinking about trade in our sort of modern sense, because this is a long, long time before you have any kind of monetary economy. But this is probably sort of gift exchange, that groups would exchange axes and sort of pass them from group to group, giving them as gifts, perhaps to increase the status of the group, showing that they could give away valuable axes. Perhaps when they sort of met up for gatherings, they brought axes as gifts, or perhaps sort of gave them as dowries at marriages. So it's this kind of exchange which spread these axes across the country. But you will actually notice that there's relatively few of these Langdale Cumbrian axes in Wales. And that's because we had our own sources for stone axes in Wales. Right down the Clyn Peninsula at Mynydd, there was a source of stone, but the stone from here was mainly used very locally, that you don't get the axes distributed really much beyond North Wales. But further up on the north coast of Wales, there was a really very important source of stone. This is arguably the second most important stone source in the country, after the Group 6 stone in Langdale. And this is known as, the axes from here are the Group 7 axes, and these were distributed over a lot of England, again, certainly all of Wales, and a large part of England. This map I always find really quite annoying, because this was actually published in 1988, and there's been an awful lot of archaeology done since 1988, and I know a great many stone axes have been found since then, and I'm sure that actually if you could look at all those axes, you would actually fill in an awful lot of these gaps. There's one little dot in Scotland, and I'm sure there are more of these Group 7 axes found in Scotland and Northern England. But actually gathering all this information together and creating a new map is a really big job. And unfortunately, nobody has actually done this yet. And I think it's a really important job that somebody needs to do. And then we could get an up-to-date map of where all these axes got to. The axes spread out all across Britain from this source, And although it's sort of technically known as the Group 7 axe source, this is actually known as Graig Lywyd. And archaeologists across Britain know the name of Graig Lywyd, and a lot of them will be able to tell you that it's actually located in North Wales, but very, very few of them will be able to tell you that it is actually found above Penmaenmawr. But of course, the members of the Penmaenmawr Historical Society know exactly where Graig Lywyd is, because it's not very far away at all. Here's a photograph of the mountain above Penmaenmawr, that you've got the Menno Strait here, Llanfyfecyn in the background, and Penmaenmawr is just at the bottom here. You've got the Pendinas quarry here that has taken away all the top of Penmaenmawr mountain here, and the rather fine hill fort that there used to be on top. And here you've got the Graig Lywyd quarry. And this is a Graig Lywyd, the grey crag here. And this is the site that's known for producing these stone axes. If we look at the geological map, you see this great big blob of purple here. And this is a type of microdiorite called augite granophyre, though known in the area as pen granite. And basically this was a plug of magma. So the molten magma was rising up to the surface through the rocks millions of years ago, but it actually started to solidify before it broke the surface. So this wasn't a volcanic eruption, but volcanic activity was causing this magma to rise, and it solidified, forming this great big plug. And then all the rock around this has since eroded away, leaving this as the upstanding mountain. So all this area here is caused by this magma solidifying. So this is all the sort of this important rock, this microdiorite. But the Neolithic people were actually most interested in the rock right along the edge of this, because this is where the magma cooled much more quickly. So you get very fine-grained rock forming. And this fine-grained rock was the rock that you could really knap very effectively, almost as well as flint. So you find this rock on Graig Lywyd, but all the way around the edge of this rock plug is the same fine-grained rock. So actually you should be able to find axe working all the way around here. And certainly we're finding that this axe working spreads a lot further than it was originally thought. Also, under the rock outcrops, the rock breaks up into scree. You can see here the quarry waste, but under the grass just nearby, there is a whole extensive area of natural scree. And this provided a really useful source of this really good rock that could be easily be used by the Neolithic people to make axes. And the first person to realize that this area was the source of stone for Neolithic axes was Samuel Hazeldine Warren, who was a geologist and a prehistorian who lived in Essex. But like all the best people, he came on holiday to Penmaenmawr. And he realized, because he had seen axes and axe working debris elsewhere, he realized that these oddly shaped stones that we were finding up on the hill were the remains of producing Neolithic axes. So in the early 1920s, he did some small excavations in the screes below Graig Lywyd, and he found tons and tons of debris from making axes. And this is the kind of thing that he found, as well as huge quantities of flakes that came off for trimming these. And most of these here, these aren't axe heads as such. These are what we call rough outs. And these, are different stages in the process of actually making axe heads. So the Neolithic people would have walked over these scree slopes looking for good bits of stone. They would have tested these pieces of stone by knocking a few flakes off. And if it didn't look like it was going to work, it would be thrown away. If the stone looked quite good, they'd start sort of shaping it more towards the shape they wanted. But maybe there was a fault in it, that something went wrong, so they'd throw that away. Quite often when they were knapping these and shaping them, they'd make sort of a miss-hit, and it'd actually break right the way across the rough out. And Hazelden Warren actually found quite a few of these where he could find both halves of these broken pieces that he could actually fit back together again. And then if the piece of stone worked really well, you could actually then carry on knapping if no accidents happen until you're working towards the final shape that you wanted. And then these pieces would actually then be taken away to finish off by grinding them finely to shape and by polishing them somewhere away from the screes, from the rock source. So it's usually these broken, failed pieces, these rough outs, are what are actually found. Hazelden Warren did actually find some polished axes, but they were these really sort of worn down stubs of axes. These have been sharpened and resharpened, and flakes been taken off them until they're barely even axes at all. So it looks like people were taking their really worn out axe heads, bringing them to the stone hut source, and then roughing out nice new axes and taking these away to finish them off and polish them up somewhere else. So Hazelden Warren did his excavations on the slopes below Gwynedd, and in the early 1990s, Gwynedd Archaeological Trust and the Department of Continuing Education, sorry, I've got that wrong, Bangor University, carried out some excavations right on the top of the hill of Gwynedd. And they did a few small trenches and test pits up there, and found huge amounts of flakes and axeworking debris right on the top of the hill. And one of their trenches exposed an area of bedrock, and in that they found that the Neolithic people had been prizing away blocks from this bedrock. So they're actually quarrying the bedrock directly to get stone to make axes with. And in the corner of this quarried area, once everything was emptied out, they actually found a rough out that had been very carefully placed in the corner, almost as an offering, perhaps to make sure that this area carries on being productive at producing axes. So the Neolithic people were using both the screes and actually directly quarrying the rock on the top of Gwynedd. On the edge of Gwynedd, there are rocky outcrops, and this particular rocky outcrop, it really looks rather battered lower down. It looks like quarrying has been going on here, and rock has been prized out from it. But it's hard to know, just looking at it, what date that quarrying was, until you see something up here, part way up the rock face. And if we look closely, if you look at this, this is actually a flake scar. So on those rough outs we were looking at, where flakes had been taken off them, it actually left scars on the rough out. And this is the same kind of thing. The flake of stone has been taken off here, leaving this scar. But this was a huge flake of stone that's come off. And you can actually see on the scar, there are ripple marks here that show that it was actually hit from the bottom here. So this must have been hit by some kind of maul or hammer, possibly even a maul on a sort of swung on a sort of A-frame. hitting this, and this looks very much like Neolithic type quarrying technology. So I certainly think that the Neolithic people were quarrying this rock face as well to get stone for axes. And if we go back to the geological map, you might have noticed before that actually there's not just one big blob of pinky purple. There are actually two other areas here where exactly the same stone is present, and there have been other sort of bubbles of magma coming up here. And one of these is a hill called Dinas, and the other is called Garrigvawr above Llanfyfechan. This is Garrigvawr, and actually there's sort of rocky faces on this side, and under the turf all around the top, there were screes there, like there were around Graig Lwyd. And this is Dinas, which is a really extraordinary hill. And you can see here, the screes here are really evident. There are huge parts of the hill which are just scree. And most of this is this nice fine-grained stone, which was ideal for making stone axes. Dinas is a really special place. There was an Iron Age hill fort right on top of it. You might even be able to see, you can still see some of the hut circles in the hill fort. And all around it, it's surrounded by an Iron Age field system, some of which I think some of the existing walls are based on the Iron Age walls. So this is really quite a special place. And this is the base of Dinas, where you can see these open screes and some of the scree that's partly covered by soil. And this is the kind of place that you can actually find axe working. Archaeologists were sort of vaguely aware that local people had been finding rough outs away from Graig Lwyd itself and finding them over here at Dinas and Garrigvawr, but they hadn't really done much investigation at all. But luckily, a local historian, David Jones, became very interested in the axes, and he did investigate where rough outs were coming from. And over many years, he collected rough outs and identified specific sites where clearly axe working was going on in these areas, a long way from Graig Lwyd. And this is the kind of place that he found axe working debris in. Here's an example of the kind of thing that you can see, which really, this is really difficult sort of things to spot. You can see here, there's a natural piece of scree, and here there's a piece that some flakes have been taken off. This is where they're sort of starting to have a look at working this. And actually in this area, there are lots of pieces of worked stone and flakes scattered about. So this is an area where people have been working axes. It's worth at this point to say that actually where you've got a lot of debris of axe working on the surface, this is actually a really important archaeological site. And underneath, there could very well be well-preserved layers, working floors, perhaps even hearths where people have been lighting fires to keep themselves warm as they're working. So there could be all sorts of important evidence down just under the surface. So it's very important in these areas for people not to go digging around looking for rough outs under the ground here, because they could cause an awful lot of damage to really important archaeological deposits. If we get a chance to investigate these, we need to do it in a very controlled and recorded way. And in fact, when David Jones was looking for rough outs, he was just looking for evidence that you could find directly on the surface, like this one that was found in that area at the foot of Dinas. And he was recording where he found each of these rough outs, so that we could actually find out exactly where these were coming from and where these important places were. And I got a chance to work with David and to have a look at these sites that he knew about, and actually did some fairly detailed survey work at this site at the foot of Dinas. And this is a particular part of the site where you've got bracken, which is shown by this brown over an area. And that means it stops the grass growing over it, and grass tends to hide all this evidence. But in winter, when the brackens died back, you can see the bare ground, and you can see this sort of scatter of flakes and rough outs and pieces of bash stone, which are shown by the red here, scattered all around this area. I was also able to record David's collection of rough outs, and as I say, he recorded where they were coming from, so I recorded that information so that it is now available to the archaeological community. But also other people have been finding rough outs all around Llanfyddekyn and Penmaenmawr, and here's a few examples that have been reported to the Historic Environment Record, including one all the way over at Aber here. So these are actually been found over a really wide area. There was also a very interesting discovery back in 1961, when a field just east of Dinas was ploughed. I think that's the only time it's ever been ploughed. And Jay Davis walked over the field and found quite a number of rough outs over there, and some of these really sort of worn down polished axes. So it looks like people were producing new axes in that area as well. And this site was particularly important because he also found quite a lot of flint flakes coming out. And that suggests that people were not just here working axes, they were here doing other things that they needed flint tools for. And maybe people were actually living in that area, certainly living long enough to produce new axes. So we have all this information coming out, which I managed to bring together really for the first time. And this is showing that instead of just having one site at Gwynedd where axes were being manufactured, there were actually different areas of manufacture all over this landscape. There was certainly an area at the western side of Penmaenmawr Mountain in the Screes where axes were being made, as I say, around Dinas and in the Screes below Garrigfawr. These were all being used to make axes. That you find rough outs and flakes scattered around all over the place around Llanfyddekyn and Penmaenmawr. So what we have here really is just not one site where these axes are coming from. We have a whole landscape which was used in the making, in the production of stone axes. And as I said before, these axes are going all over Britain. So this is an area that's really important for understanding the Neolithic. So it's important in a whole sort of British national context. And yet it's not really been investigated at all. So many questions to ask about this area and so much to find out about it. So the first question is, how do we do this? How do we get the people and the money to investigate this really important landscape? But luckily, the Gwynedd Landscape Partnership Project came along. I don't know if you've heard about this. This is a very large heritage lottery funded project. Its main aim is to involve local people with the landscape, environment and heritage of the Gwynedd mountain range that they live around. And this involves all sorts of different projects, including conservation, habitat conservation projects, footpath and access work, and also various heritage projects. And this seemed to be absolutely ideal to fit the study of the Neolithic axes into this, because this area is actually on the sort of northern part of the Kenney mountain range. So myself and the Snowdonia National Park archaeologist put together a project, and this is known as the Landscape of Neolithic Axes project, to run as part of the Kenney Landscape Partnership. And the aim of this is to get lots of volunteers to help us do practical work to actually investigate this landscape and look for working of Neolithic axes. The Landscape Partnership, the Kenney Landscape Partnership is only really sort of got started this year, but we had the opportunity last year to actually trial some of our ideas about how to do this investigation. So we actually started doing some work last year, last November, and this was work done at the foot of Dinas. You can see Dinas here. And one of the big problems with investigating this is that where you've got these screes and perhaps sort of screes hidden under bracken here, you can actually find evidence of axe working. But what about the vast majority of the area that's under grass, perhaps under pasture like here, or under sort of rough moorland terrain? How do you actually find evidence of axe working under that kind of vegetation? Well, one way to do that is to dig test pits. So you actually dig through the soil and find what's in the soil and what's underneath. So last year we got together a team of volunteers, and they helped us to dig test pits. And here you have aerial views of them busy working. And these test pits are only 1 metre square, so you're not doing too much disturbance, and you can actually dig through the plough soil down to the natural glacial deposits underneath, and see what you find as you work your way through. And this was all done very carefully, digging carefully layer by layer, and all the soil was sieved, so the volunteers could see any finds that were coming out. Everything is carefully recorded by photographs and notes and drawings. So this proper archaeological recording. And all the hard work was done by the volunteers, but they were carefully supervised by Carol Ryan Young and George Smith from Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, and John Roberts from the Snowdonia National Park Authority. So careful eye was kept on them so that nothing was done wrong. And this is really what they were looking for. It doesn't look at all impressive, but these are two examples of the kind of flakes that were napped off when producing stone axes. But even better would be to find these roughouts that I was talking about. And we did actually manage to find some roughouts. Here's an example. This is a really sort of early stage roughout. Somebody's taken a few flakes off this and decided it wasn't going to work very well, and thrown it away. So it's left there for us to find thousands of years later. Here we are. This is the plot of the test pits that were dug, scattered around over this field. That 16 test pits were dug in 2 weeks. So quite a lot of hard work was done. And up here, this is the area that we had previously found axe working debris. So we know axe working was happening here. So you might assume perhaps in these test pits, we might find most of the axe working somewhere close by over here. But in fact, you can see from these colours, the darker the colour, the more axe working debris was found. That there was quite a lot of axe working debris in test pits a long way away from the known area of working. And here we actually found 3 rough outs. So 3 of these test pits actually produced rough outs as well. So this showed that our approach of test pitting definitely works. We could find evidence of axe working. It showed that actually we could find it much further away from known axe working areas than we expected, and that actually this might be very much more widely distributed than anybody had really thought about before. But this was very much just a trial. This gives us a rough idea of perhaps where to look more, but a lot of these finds were actually in the plough soil. They'd moved a little bit. What we need to find is if there are any remains of napping that's actually in place, that we've actually got deposits that haven't been disturbed. And we also need to find if we've got particular concentrations. What about these other fields further around? Was this axe working activity much more widely spread than even this is showing? So last year it gave us lots of really good ideas and showed us how well this could work. Here are some of the finds that I've shown. One of the rough outs. Here are 2 of the other rough outs that were found. You can see with this one, they've really got quite well advanced in creating the nice rounded shape for the blade of an axe here. But they've had a bit of an accident and it's broken in half. I do think you probably had quite a lot of Neolithic swearing going on in these axe working areas because this kind of breakage seemed to happen quite a lot. And then we have a really interesting little object here. This is far too small to be a rough out, but there's really careful flaking along the edge here. And in fact, this looks like it's a small stone knife. Away from these axe source areas, you get very few tools made in this kind of stone apart from axes. They don't seem to have been using it for other kinds of tools. But on the source area, it was probably really handy just to use the stone that you got available if you wanted to make a knife rather than going looking for flint or some other kind of stone. So it certainly looks like they were using this for other kinds of tools. And why did they need a knife in this area? Perhaps this shows actually they might have been living fairly close by. They might have been doing other things in this area rather than just making axes, which is a really handy little hint. So we were going to do lots more work this year. We've got all sorts of things planned to actually extend this investigation, but of course the pandemic happened. And at the start of March, I thought really we wouldn't be able to do anything at all. But as we got into August and September, it looked as if maybe we could actually get out there. We were working outdoors. Perhaps we could get out there with volunteers and do some field work. So we actually did a lot of work planning to do some field work in October. And we were just about to start advertising for volunteers to come and help us when the Conway local lockdown started. And really we felt we couldn't possibly then carry on with this when there was a local lockdown going on. So we had to put that on hold. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to do any work so far. I was anticipating that I would be able to share these wonderful results that we've just had with you at this point. But unfortunately, there's no new information. We are hoping maybe in March, we might be able to get out and do some field work. The landscape, the Gwynedd Landscape Partnership is a 5-year project. So there is still plenty of time to get out there and do field work. Hopefully after COVID pandemic has got under control and we can actually go out there and work as normal. So we certainly will be looking for volunteers in the future. But this perhaps gives a little bit of time to sort of look at some of the questions we want to ask and look at this quite extraordinary landscape. This is a photograph looking from near the top of Dinas. Garrigvawr is over that way, and we know there was axe working there. This is just the end of Penmaenmawr Mountain, and here in the scree slopes here, there was axe working going on. So in the middle here, you've got a very nice area surrounded by axe working. Were people living here? This is Tynnaclwyfan Farm, and it's called Tynnaclwyfan because it's located on a sort of level shelf or stage in the landscape. And this is actually sands and gravels. So this is quite a nice, well-drained area. That would be a really nice place to live in almost any period with the river close by. Was this where people might have been living while they were making the Neolithic axes? Down here, you've got the Lavan Sands. In the Neolithic period, the sea would have been further out. This would have been a flat coastal plain with a much sort of narrower Menai Strait running through. So this is really quite a good sort of rich environment, lots of resources for people, perhaps farming up here and collecting natural resources down on the coastal plain. You certainly would still, though, be able to have used the sea to travel along the coastline. So this looks like really an ideal sort of place for people to live and to have wider contacts. What about Penmaenmawr? Here's the Gwynedd quarry with the Neolithic axe production up above there, but rough outs are found in quite a wide area around here, including right the way over to Voilis. So are they working in a much, much wider area than was ever thought here? Also here you've got the Great Orme. Of course, on the Great Orme, there was copper mining. And the real sort of height of the copper mines on the Great Orme was from about 1600 BC to 1400 BC. But it probably got going as early as 1800 BC. The Neolithic axe production probably carried on till maybe as late as 2000 BC. So actually, these are coming really quite close together. And I do wonder whether the geological knowledge that the local people had here from working the stone for the axes, how much of that might have actually helped in the discovery of the copper ores on the Great Orme. Are there connections between these sites? And where actually were these things being finished off? This is a polishing stone from Llandergai, but this was buried in a cremation burial. It wasn't very close to a contemporary settlement. So it looks like there might have been some axe finishing going on in this area, but we don't really understand where they were actually finishing off these axes. Here is an aerial photograph of the area above Penmaenmawr. This is the Gwynedd quarry, and this is Dinas here. And up here you've got this big flat plateau, upland plateau, which is now very wet and marshy, known as Waun Llanfair. But you can actually find rough outs and evidence of axe working all the way around here. And in the Neolithic, this would have been sort of rather scrubby woodland and wouldn't have been anywhere near as wet. And I wonder if people were actually living up here, and was this where they were actually finishing off the axes, perhaps using sand from the streams running through here for the final sort of polishing. So there are an awful lot of questions to ask of this landscape, and perhaps even rather sort of more difficult ones to find answers to. These are really quite amazing outcrops. Dinas looks very prominent, unusual hill. how did the Neolithic people see these? Penmaenmawr Mountain itself is very prominent, and there was axe working going on just on the edge of here. Were these sort of major landmarks in the Neolithic landscape? Did people really sort of see these as important places, as well as places that they could actually get stone for axes? If you look down the coast from Bangor, you can see this whole succession of really quite wonderful headlands. And if you imagine Penmaenmawr Mountain when it had its original top on, this would have been really sort of notable landmark. In the Neolithic, as I say, this would have been land, but you could still have travelled along the coast a little bit further out and walked along this coastal plain. So can we get some idea perhaps of how the Neolithic people saw this landscape? Were these actually important landmarks, important special places? Did the people who actually used the axes from here, even as far away as Norfolk and Kent, did they know where they came from? Did they know they came from a special sort of landscape right on the coast here? So loads and loads of questions still to ask, and hopefully plenty of time still to do it. So here's just an idea of the partners that we're working with on this, including Penmaenmawr Historical Society, and a quick thanks to Gareth Wyn Jones at Tinacloevan Farm for allowing us to dig holes in his land. So thank you very much. That is the end of the talk, and hopefully I've still got some time to go through some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was brilliant and so exciting about the Gwynedd partnership. We're, as you say, we're partners in that venture and hope to be able to attract a lot of young people and their families as part of the volunteers in the work that will go on in that partnership. I know we're talking with planning things now about what we might be able to do and to provide here at the museum. And one of the photographs you showed was two of our volunteers who were doing pit testing with you last year. I know the weather was a bit inclement, but people really enjoyed it. And I think a few flakes were found. Jane's going to answer some questions now. You've got the questions in the chat box there, Jane, haven't you? For you to
yes,
select.
well, I'm not sure if this was quite pointed out that people could actually write questions in the chat box. I've got one thank you comment, but we don't seem to have any questions. So I don't know if anybody wants to type any quick questions in the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. There's a little symbol saying chat.
Jane, whilst people are typing. Oh, there's some coming up now.
Ah, yes, right.
Oh,
some.
So, to get Jane to come here and see.
I think so. Angela Williams has asked if there were any other later finds discovered in the test pits. In fact, there was very, very little else found apart from what exactly we were looking for. There were a few little bits of napped chert, which is very similar to flint. And again, that is something that's suggesting perhaps the Neolithic people are actually living nearby. So those are good little hints to suggest that we might be able to find more in future. But we found very few later finds. Gabriel Abbott is asking if I have any ideas as to how the axe working might have been organised. And this is one of the really big questions, which is going to be quite difficult to answer, but maybe we might in future find some hints. Certainly you wonder, is this local people that control access to these sources of stone, or were people coming from some distance to come and get axes themselves? So there are all sorts of different ways you could think of this. Was it actually quite intensive working? Certainly an awful lot of axes seem to have been produced. So were the specialists doing this? Or was it just a few people doing it in their spare time? So these are questions that we really need to look at and try and answer. But really, we don't have answers to that at all so far. And I'm just reading quickly through other questions. Yeah, there's a question here asking whether people might have lived in the Llanfyddekyn Valley actually under Llanfyddekyn itself. And I would think that is very likely. It's more difficult to actually find evidence of that where it's actually built over, because a lot of that evidence will be destroyed. Though certainly rough-ats have been found in people's gardens in Llanfyddekyn. And the chances are that hidden under somebody's garden, there might be remains of a Neolithic settlement. So you never know what might come up in future. Yeah, John Ratcliffe is mentioning that stone axes are used in New Guinea, which is certainly a place where you've got really good parallels to how people actually used axes, because you've got people that still use them now, and he's saying they're used as part of a bride price, and this is certainly one way that stone axes could well have travelled around the country. That these are the kinds of things that you might give in exchange for a bride to come and marry your son. Yes, and somebody's just asking about younger people getting involved. We are definitely wanting to get younger people involved. When we can finally get this up and running properly and safely, we're certainly wanting to get the schools involved, and we're hoping to have weekend open days so that children can come along with their parents and can be involved in digging their own test pits and working with it as well. So yes, actually that's from Fiona Grant. So I don't know if she was going to come all the way over from Glenkeiriog to come and do that. So yes, we might be able to see you in future.
And I think it's important to say, Jane, that our Facebook page will have details of what you're planning as part of that whole partnership. So it should be able to inform young people and their families what's going on, and you know, how they might join and get involved. And we here at the museum want to get more young people involved, so there'll be a lot more activity for them to join, hopefully next year and beyond.
Yes, and certainly we'll try and advertise everything properly. So yeah, keep an eye on the Penmaenmawr Facebook page, and Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, and the Carnedd Landscape Partnership, and all sorts of other things. We'll get the information out.
Sorry.
Have we got time for any more questions?
Yes, we can have another two, I think.
Shall I keep going?
Yeah.
There's one asking where the furthest afield that pen axes have been found. And actually, I think the piece of the axe up in Scotland might well be the furthest distance. That's actually a part of an axe that was buried in a ceremonial monument up in Scotland. And as I say, I suspect there are other ones up there. but there are some certainly found all the way down in Kent. And although not many got down to Cornwall, there is the odd one or two that have been found right the way down in Cornwall as well. So they're traveling an awfully long way. And as I say, I'm sure if somebody can actually put the time in to do some more research on this, there are a lot more axes that have been found since that map was created. So I think we'll find that they've got a lot further. I'm not sure that any actually got to Ireland, but I do wonder if one or two might have got across to Ireland as well.
Jane, it's Michelle Bathers here. I've actually seen one of the stone axes in the museum in Perigeux, and it actually mentions that it's from Penmaenmawr Quarry.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the great things about these axes, that you can actually tell by detailed analysis, and even a lot of people who are specialists in this can tell just by looking at them where they come from. So when these are found, you know, that they can go in museums, and it can actually be people can actually know that they have actually come all this way from Penmaenmawr.
John was just asking, John Good was just asking, the map you put up earlier that you wanted to be updated, he's asking, is that mainly limited by funds or people, or both, that you're not able to do that work?
It's a matter of time, really. Actually, I do know somebody in Oxford is working on trying to find all the new discoveries of the Langdale axes. That's the big source that I was talking about. So she is actually working on doing this job for that. But that is such a big job, searching through all these excavation reports and all sorts of other records to actually find the locations of these, that she's certainly not going to be able to do the Penmaenmawr axes as well. So it just needs probably a PhD student to take this on and to actually get on top of all this information and put it together.
Okay, shall we call it an end to the questions there, Jane? If there's anybody wants to ask any other specific questions, they can email you at GAT, can't they?
They can, yes. I think we were going to put up the email address, but I'm not sure it's there. But
Okay, well, we'll get that and we'll put it up somewhere for them. And I just wanted everybody to know that this talk has been recorded and it'll be on our website. That's www.penmaenmawrmuseum.co.uk, and there'll be a link there to take you to YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it over again if you want to. I just wonder if everybody would be able to unmute themselves just now so that we can show our appreciation to Jane for her brilliant talk this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jane. Really good.
That was great.
69 people present, I think.
69, that's very good.
Yeah.
73.
73 at the most. I just want to say a couple of other things. We have got our next meeting now is not until January the 20th, 2021, and our speaker then will be Gareth Roberts. Gareth is associated with Mentef Acwen, a social enterprise project, but he's also a photographer and an illustrator, and his talk is going to be on the lighter side of mapping local history. If you would like to become a member of Penmaenmawr Museum and Historical Society, or you'd like to buy some Christmas cards that are specially designed for us, we have 2 different types and lots of books that you might want to purchase for as a Christmas present. You can get links to all of those on our website as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great Christmas and end of year, and we'll see you in January, hopefully. Bye-bye.